Hello and welcome to episode 38 of the Chills at Will podcast. It's a pleasure today to have F. Douglas Brown. F. Douglas Brown is the author of two poetry collections, Icon, which was through Writ Large Press in 2018, and 0 to 3, which is University of Georgia 2014, the winner of the 2013 Cave Canem Poetry Prize, selected by US Poet Laureate Tracy K. Smith. He also co-authored with poet Geffrey Davis, Begotten, which is through URB Books in 2016. It's a chapbook of poetry as part of the Floodgate Poetry Series. Brown is an educator, has been an educator for over 20 years, currently teaches English and African American poetry at Loyola High School of Los Angeles, which is an all-boys Jesuit school. He is both a Cave Canem and Kundiman fellow, Kundiman and Cave Canem fellow, and was selected by Poets and Writers as one of their 10 notable debut poets of 2014. His poems have appeared in the Academy of American Poets, the PBS News Hour, the Virginia Quarterly or VQR, Bat City Review, the Chicago Quarterly Review, CQR, the Southern Humanities Review, the Sugar House Review, Cura Magazine, and Muzzle Magazine. He is co-founder and curator of Unfadeable, the Requiem for Sandra Bland, a quarterly reading series examining restorative justice through poetry as a means to address racism. When he is not teaching, writing, or with his children, Isaiah, Olivia, and Simone, he is busy DJing in the greater Los Angeles area. Doug, thanks so much for joining me today. You coached me ahead of time with some of the pronunciation. I botched one or two, but I appreciate that. Besides that, is there anything else you'd like to add to the introduction?
No, man, just thank you. I don't know when this is airing, but we are meeting on MLK Day, so I think we should definitely. We're in a time when we need great healing and great peace to come about. So to throw that out there, and I'm coming to you from Southern California, Tongvan land, and I want to throw that up as well and to honor those folks. So thank you for having me.
I really appreciate that. Yes, we are indeed recording on the 18th of January to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. A lot of reviews, Bay City, Southern Humanities Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, et cetera, et cetera. So you are around a lot. You've been published much, and we're going to be delving into that a little bit later. And we got to talk about the connection. We're both Santa Clara Broncos.
Whoop, whoop.
Go Broncos. We got
right.
Leon Panetta, Steve Nash, Kurt Rambis.
What's his my
Douglas
man?
Brown.
My man, who's the head coach of the
Lloyd Pierce.
the Celtics? Lloyd Pierce.
Lloyd Pierce. I think he's with the Hawks now.
He's with the Hawks.
Okay.
That's right, the Hawks. He played for the Celtics, right?
He did. Good guy. He was around a little bit. He was a little before me, but he was around, and he was just a good guy. He'd come and play at the gym every once in a while. A really good dude. Right. Work at the basketball camps.
The head of the UC schools. Oh my gosh, why am I going blank? She used to
Napolitano.
Napolitano was a Santa Clara grad. Yeah.
We've got many good ones. We've got many great ones for sure. Francisco Jimenez. I was lucky enough to have him as a teacher, as a professor. So go Broncos. And again, a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much. I know it's a day off for you as a teacher, and I appreciate your time very much.
No problem. Yeah. Anytime.
Tell me about growing up in the Bay Area, San Francisco, I believe.
Yeah.
I want to know, what it was like to grow up there. What were some of what were some of your influences in literature and just in life in general?
So I'm a proud product of Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco. At one point was probably one of the more rougher places in San Francisco. And now I understand a lot of it is gentrified and becoming more and more vacant in terms of people of color. But growing up there, I loved it. I loved my bedroom had a view of all of downtown San Francisco, the Bay Bridge into Oakland, and you could see uh, I would just leave my window open all the time and just look at the cars going back and forth and the lights of the city. I love the city. I'm very urban in that way. And I remember I was a senior in high school and the Loma Prieta earthquake hit.
Oh yeah.
So seeing the bridge empty really reminds me of this time that we're in now. And I tell that to my students now that, you know, it was only like a week or two when things were really, really at its worst, I think, during Loma Prieta. But those feelings really were similar to what's happening right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My influences are always probably, I used to always go to the San Francisco writers and poets, especially the beat poets from San Francisco, especially Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who I love so much. Diane DePrima taught me before I went to grad school.
Rest in peace.
She's not.
She died fairly
Rest in
recently,
peace.
correct? Yeah.
That's right. That's right. This past year, like 2 months ago, maybe. Diane was a big influence. She's not San Franciscan, but she lived in San Francisco for a long time.
Right.
And so many folks from the Bay, you know, Bob Haas and across the Bay in Berkeley there. It's just, you know, San Francisco is a rich literary venue that growing up, my mother was an artist, so we would go to museums a lot and go to libraries a lot. And I just always loved the library for all of the things, you know, not just the books. I think the first time I kissed a girl was at a library, you know. So, you know, there's a lot of things that happen that should and shouldn't happen. But I just think the rich cultural history of San Francisco rubbed off on me. You know.
Yeah. We talk about like gentrification, and you know, there's with the Last Black Man in San Francisco that came out fairly recently, and you know, in
it's
San
a Reardon
Francisco,
grad. A Reardon grad made that. I went to Archbishop Reardon.
Okay,
too,
yeah,
and I think Reardon grad starred and directed that movie.
Yeah. So I mean, so like you talk about, there's such a cultural history, there's such a poetic history, such a literary history in San Francisco, Oakland, the Bay Area in general, and obviously, you know, with Google and all those things that like you talk about have made San Francisco just a rich man's, you know, very little middle class, it seems like, right?
Right.
You know, they got the buses for the Google people to take them to their places, and it's kind of like, so if I'm correct in reading some of your poetry that it is autobiographical, your father's from the South, is that correct?
Yeah, from Mississippi. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, you don't necessarily have the long history in San Francisco. What did your dad bring with him from Mississippi? What kind of history, what kind of, you know, art was he into? What kind of stories did he bring with him?
A whole lot of stories. My dad was a funny guy, man. And I think one thing when you deal and when you're raised by a Southerner, when you deal with people from the South, you know, the idea of community is important for them. You know, whether it be your own personal community, like your family, or the community where you live, or like my dad was a big union man.
Okay.
And he would not cross the line. I remember trying to take him to breakfast, and they were outside. The waitresses and waiters were picketing, and he was like, "Nope, we're not going here." And he was just that kind of person. He just really was down for people. He would always have like Friday get together. All his friends would come home and hang out. And just kind of just play cards, have fun, smoke, drink, you know, do a little bit of gambling, spend most of their money that they just worked hard on. And I, you know, and a lot of them were transplants from different Southern areas, you know, and so they told a lot of stories. They held on to each other, and it was important for them to come together to do that. The other thing I think with my dad in terms of art, I think of two things that in particular that were him. One is music. You couldn't go into a room in his house without hearing a radio or some kind of music playing, you know, and it would be different music everywhere, almost like a department store, right? But way louder. Like you just would walk through these rooms and
So
there
no
was
elevator
music
music style then, huh?
No, it was no music at all, you know. And then the other thing is I'm blessed to have two parents. I had two parents who were outstanding cooks, you know, and they could really get down. And, you know, so I'm a pretty big guy, you know, because just they could do with so little, they could really make an amazing meal and make something really, really fun. I know we talked about the poems to read, but I have a poem that could really like kind of capture this idea of what it was like growing up with my dad.
Of course.
And thinking about all the things that I just said. And I love this poem and reading this poem because one, it was in the Virginia Quarterly. And I just think that in sending this out, I thought this was a poem that wouldn't be honored by such a like prestigious kind of quarterly. But they really loved it. And the editor at the time, Ralph Eubanks, he's from Mississippi and he writes about Mississippi. And you know, and he wrote like a note that he really felt like Mississippi in this poem.
Oh, wow. What a compliment.
Right.
Yeah.
This is called Hard Uncles. Leroy, wisdom in a chuckle, gold chains drape around his neck, high yellow on high yellow. He broadcasts, I've been young, but you ain't never been old. Mid-city, like his claims, stitched bold across his cap. Hard uncles, cool cats who can Billy Preston in patent leather. Nothing from nothing is their way. Something they've been taught they've taught their manicured hands how to be quick-witted and quick to grab. Ron's Tennessee toddy, all ass and nobody. Bones on a table, fast as a fish fry, fast as gambling 2 weeks of wages away. Mike on the phone from Vegas and Gary in the back. Roll another one, Freddie B. Smoke and booze hold hands. Swing from the ceiling and into everyone's eyes. If you ain't ready to lose, don't bring your sissy butt down here, T the shoe doctor blurts out. A notice for all pacemakers and the faint of funds. How the heart stops when money is lost in a heap. How the heads of proud men swell or retract, puff or crumble. John Paul whispers in my ear, anything better than sex and watermelon, leave it alone. His finger extending towards someone in the corner holding a bowl of empty luck, a wallet full of poor decisions. It's nearly 1 a.m. at this point. Excuses are more eager than the pot. Leroy gets some shoe polish from the closet and blots his lie. Honey, that damn car broke down again, he rehearses, and laughter barrels into a cab. His drunken squint and wink, his two-fingered blessing shakes the fog away. He's been down this road before, home the hard way, and a joker up his sleeve.
I'll ceremoniously drop the mic if you don't mind. I'll drop the mic for you. Faint of funds. Faint of funds. I love that. You said something about the two-finger goodbye, maybe?
Yeah, they're right.
Yeah. And I love the title. The title says so much. Hard uncles. Some, I'm sure, you know, maybe one or two literally uncles, and some
most of them not
role models and
exactly. The guy Leroy, he used to always say, every time I saw him, he would always say, "Oh, I remember the night you was born. I remember the night you was born." Every day, every time I saw him, he would say that. And like how that, and I even wrote a poem about that. And just like to hear that from somebody, it's like, oh yeah, we're not blood related, but somehow we're related. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you are responsible for my upbringing,
Right.
and you
Right.
hold the weight of my birth in your memory. I love that.
Oh man, the images are so strong there. You really see yourself in that scene. What was the line about "I've been young, but you ain't ever been old"? Did I get it right?
Right.
That's a great one. That's a great one.
That's straight from his mouth. Yeah, yeah.
Did your dad get a chance to hear that poem?
No, no.
That's too
I
bad.
wrote this after him, but the last time I went to Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
one of my cousins, we had like a fish fry, and it's one of my favorite readings I think I've ever done.
Mm,
And my dad was from this small town in Mississippi called Madison,
Madison.
and we were at her house, this small little house, and a friend of mine drove me down there. I did a reading at Ole Miss. It's
Mm,
about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Madison,
okay.
and we drove there, and we were all like kind of huddled and in this kitchen, and I read this poem, and they were just
Oh,
cracking up. They were cracking up.
how cool is that?
Yeah, and that means a lot to me. Like I really want to, uh, like if you look at the poem and you could
Mm-hmm.
break it down, and you could definitely see like some technical skill in it, but also it's important for me to connect to people.
Sure.
Like the poet Sterling Brown from the Harlem Renaissance, Harvard educated, but his most famous poem, and he taught at Harvard. That's where he did all his teaching. And his most famous poem is where he has this persona, Old Limb, and that was kind of Sterling Brown's thing. It's like if the poetry can't talk to the people, then what am I really doing? And so
Well, I mean, it
I,
was
I like it like that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was originally in auditory form, right? It was originally, I mean, it wasn't written on paper. Talking about poetry in general, it was
Right,
it was
right,
to be presented. It was to be shared.
right.
No doubt.
And people tend to put it they want to put it on pedestal on these ivory towers, and
Yeah.
luckily I think the success and the excellence of spoken word has
Mm-hmm.
kind of balanced it out,
Mm,
you know.
no doubt. Don't want to leave your mom out, and we want to. You said today would be her birthday, so
Yeah,
we celebrate her for sure. What was her background? Is she from the West Coast? What did she bring? You said that she was an artist. In what
right.
way?
So I'm half black and half Filipino. My mother was Filipino.
Oh, okay.
She was born in Salinas.
Okay.
A lot of migrant Filipino workers there,
Mhm.
and she came from those fields. And she was the oldest girl of maybe 8 or 9
Mm,
kids, and she was the oldest girl. So had like this toughness about her,
uh-huh.
but also very, very obviously just nurturing and warm, and
Right.
very creative. My mother was extremely
Mm,
creative person. Again, also a good cook, but also someone who whatever it was, like she just can repurpose things. She
mm,
would love like this crafting moment we're in right now that
mm,
the world finds itself in. I could just see her. YouTube was a thing back then,
mm.
posting her things on YouTube, showing people how to macrame or
Mhm.
use a butter tub 20 different ways. And that
Yeah.
kind of rubbed off on all of us, my brothers and sisters. We were all
Mm,
creative. Even my
right.
brother is an investment banker. A lot of creativity in him.
Huh.
And she went to art school. She went to the Academy of Arts there in San Francisco.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Oh man.
really ingrained in us to do art, to
Yeah.
make, and to love art. And she was mad I was an English major at Santa Clara.
Uh,
She wanted me to be an art major,
uh-huh.
and I know she's looking down on me right now. because yesterday we just watched this cartoon about these cave people. I don't want to say the name because all the trademark stuff. Um, but I when I was a kid, I drew this caveman family, and my mother was like, "Oh, you got something with that. You really should stick with that, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, whatever."
Mhm.
And I never did it. I never put anything aside. It was kind of like a spinoff of the Flintstones, and it was like, yeah,
Mm.
that's already been done. I'm not going to try to do that again. And sure enough, here it is. And it's like watching this cartoon with my daughter. I was like, this is basically what I pitched. This is
Oh
what I
no,
drew up.
no.
So
Ah, dang
she
it.
was right. I
Yeah.
know.
How is your Tagalog?
Non-existent.
Non-existent. Okay. All right.
One, my mother, she didn't speak it. I think my great grandfather was the one
Mm.
who would have taught her and didn't teach her. And
Mm-hmm.
my family, actually, we speak Bizayn, which is another dialect of Filipino language.
Oh,
So
okay. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, well, our family comes from Mindanao,
Oh, right. In
and
the South, is that correct?
right, that's where the current president is from. He's the first president from Mindanao,
Okay.
in a big, lush, beautiful island. I've never been. I've been
Yeah.
wanting to go. So,
Yeah. Oh,
and
wow.
it's you know, the Philippines is majority Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a Muslim population
Sure.
in the Philippines, and Mindanao is the largest concentration of those
Mm-hmm.
Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So
Well, it sounds like your parents gave you a lot of gifts, and one of them is your name,
yes,
Frederick Douglass Brown. Is that correct?
right.
How do you know much about the history of that? I mean, did you feel like that was a like pressure on you? Did you feel like that was a gift? What was kind of the thinking behind that, maybe for your parents?
Well, I'm a junior, so my dad was a Fred,
Ah,
and you know, being named, I'm named after him. He's named after Frederick Douglass. We only have the one S in ours.
okay.
But still, my grandmother named my dad after Frederick Douglass. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's always been a lot of pressure, and something that I never wanted to deal with as a kid. I didn't want to deal with it. Because you see those pictures of Frederick Douglass, and those images of Frederick Douglass, just as a kid, they just scare you, right? It's
Mm.
like, here is somebody so serious and stern that I don't want to deal with him, and I'm named after that.
Uh-huh.
And so then, as I grew up and learned more, obviously, about Frederick Douglass and what he came to mean, I really appreciated that. But still, again, appreciated it and loved that fact, but still wanted to turn away, because the other thing is like, well, how do you live up to somebody like that?
Sure.
How do you compare yourself to that? Can you compare yourself to somebody so great like that? And unless you're doing things on that level, you really can't. I mean, in any level,
Uh-huh.
what he went through, what Frederick Douglass went through, is just so magnanimous. It's
Right.
like, just
Right.
give it up and step
Right.
aside. Um, but then, as we got closer to 2016, and even prior, probably about 2010, and all of these different things that were happening, I think it was more important for me to embrace the name.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, I really shortened it to
Mm.
the F, and started taking on the F Douglas part.
Sure.
Um, More a thing, I always say my dad is a very good Fred. He looked like a guy named Fred, and I never wanted anybody to shorten, and if you called me Frederick, it would be fine,
Mm-hmm.
but I just wasn't a Fred. And so taking the name all the way off really helped solve that.
Mm-hmm.
When I started exploring it, probably, it was in a group, one of those 30 for 30 writing groups. 30 for
Oh.
30 is in April. People write 30 poems for the
Mm.
30 days of April, since it's poetry month, a
Sure.
poem a day. And I was in a group, And I was like, well, what am I going to do for this 30 days? And, everybody in that group now, everybody has books and heavily
Hmm.
awarded books and this and that and this and that. And I was like, I'm going to do this thing for the Jacob Lawrence instead of me trying to figure out what part of Frederick Douglass, because that's the thing I want to focus on next.
Hmm.
I'm going to look at these paintings that Jacob Lawrence did
Yeah.
of Frederick Douglass, because there was about 33, 32 of them. I was
Okay.
like, this would be easy. I said to myself, I could
Famous
just
last
write all of
words.
these. Right, right. And so that's kind of how it started. And like you said earlier, it would have the panel on it, and
Hmm.
I would, and that would refer to the panel on of the Jacob Lawrence panel of Douglass. And so Jacob Lawrence, the Harlem Renaissance painter, is known for doing these panels. His most famous one is the Migration series, which is in the MoMA
Hmm.
in New York. And his first series was this Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman panel series that he painted. It's like 30 something on each of them. When Jacob Lawrence did it, he would put, because he didn't have very much money at the time, he didn't want to mix the paint. He wanted to conserve the paint.
Hmm.
And so what he did was he put these pieces of paper on the wall of his studio, and he would paint them simultaneously. And so he kind of had a clear cut sign of where he was going to go.
Right.
He had these like almost like epigraphs or his own take of the Frederick Douglass autobiographies.
Mm.
And, he would spend some time at the Schomburg, do some research on Douglass, put it on the bottom, and then he would just paint.
Wow.
I remember. So I kind of wanted to walk my understanding of Douglass through the Jacob Lawrence filter,
Sure.
and Lawrence had done a lot of the work. And as much as I know a lot on Douglass, but sometimes you can know too much on somebody. And so I needed something to help me free me up.
Hmm.
And so that was the first thing that did it. And, that probably lasted for about 15 poems or so,
Yeah.
a good portion of them. And then I kind of hit a wall with it
Hmm.
and did have to do more research on Douglass and
Hmm.
get some other know-how, which I could talk about.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, there's
Yeah.
something very interesting about the idea of the muse, right? I mean, where Jacob Lawrence had Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass as his muses. You had kind of both of them as your muse. Now, ekphrasis, am I saying the word correctly?
Ekphrasis, yes.
Ekphrasis is the Greek word for basically for the muse, right? For using one form of art to beget another form of art,
Right.
right? Have you found yourself doing that a lot besides even with the Frederick Douglass, Jacob Lawrence?
Oh, completely. I
Yeah.
love the form. And because, again, I see so many, I think the form is initially for visual art,
Right.
to write about visual art. And even in that way,
Hmm.
we've expanded probably since the beginning of it, right?
Hmm.
Film is a visual art,
Hmm.
photography is a visual art.
Hmm.
And for Douglass, it made sense to go to Lawrence, to think about Lawrence and what he did, but also to think about photography, because Douglass is one of the most photographed Americans in the 19th century. It's pretty much him and Lincoln
Hmm.
are the most. And, people asked him to sit for them. And at the time, he loved the medium. And
Hmm.
he loved the medium because at the time there was so much misinformation about Black folks and what Black folks look like in particular.
Hmm.
And so he wanted to come off as someone who was way more distinguished than what people's minds might have been for or thought of someone who had been enslaved could be,
Hmm.
And so you had so many naysayers, even when they heard Douglas speak, it was like, no way, he was a slave. He couldn't have been self-taught and whatnot. So he was very conscious of his appearance,
Sure.
very conscious of making sure he wouldn't even smile, that he wanted everybody to always know that he had been enslaved, and he would never let them forget that. And I think that's really important to note with him and to think about him. And all of those things, along with Lawrence and the way Lawrence and his Harlem Renaissance peers were trying to find the leaders from their past to really exalt. You know,
so you must have spit out your coffee when you heard Trump say something about how people are just starting to discover Frederick Douglass these days. Do you remember that quote?
Yeah, I actually, so I want to share something with you. So I didn't read the poem the other day, but Frederick Douglass, so usually when I read these poems, I'll just say is I really try to show people the visual part too, you know, and because of COVID, it's really helped out in that way.
Sure.
And so, you know, I gave a reading at Santa Clara, and it was a long reading. And I was like, there's no way I'm just going to sit up there and read on the screen. I'm going to show them some things too. So I could show you. Then one of them, again, it's not the poem that we talked about, but if you want to hear it, and let me show you this,
please,
this photo or this painting. And it's really interesting that the painting I'm going to show you was done by Jacob Lawrence. One of the things, and what I'll say is I'm getting this out, one of my influences is Natasha Trethewey, the former poet laureate. And Trethewey is really, her work is really interested in history, like the personal history, and how that personal history may or may not be impacted by a societal history that's happening at the same time.
Right.
So
what's in a name?
So this is a good example of some of the images of Douglass that I would have seen growing up, and there's a more contemporary one there with the color on it. But yeah, this is what normally we would have seen, and what I would have been running away from as a kid, you know, and thinking about the look on Douglass's face, which I kind of talk about in a lot of different ways, as you'll hear in some of the poems. Here's the Jacob Lawrence. This is Lawrence in this top right corner there, and the black and white photo is him when he would have been doing these paintings. And then him as an older man. He taught at University of Washington.
That's right.
UW. And so there's like a center there, studio there, and you can see the bright colors, how vibrant they are.
Oh yeah.
But they are pretty flat. They're like mixed with themselves almost.
I see.
So it's really interesting, like how he just looked at that technique. And so then there's these photos and daguerreotypes that I found in different places. That, you know, I was fortunate that there was a book that came out called Picturing Douglass that had all of the photos that I've taken of Frederick Douglass. But also I got to see some of these. I did, it wasn't a fellowship. I just, you know, I was able to be a reader at the Huntington Library that they have all kind of archives and so on. And so, I look at Douglas in different ways. This is the picture. He was not very fond of this image, primarily because it looks like that Douglas is smiling, and he never wanted to show himself smiling. It's like this little tiny smirk.
It is.
And so he asked him to remove it. Before I look at these videos, this is a video that was made not too long ago. If you are familiar with drunk history, and it's really interesting. So I try to look at Douglas and contemporary, the contemporary icon, and try to put them kind of next to one another and in conversation with one another. So that's what this looks like. But here it is right here. So this is the Jacob Lawrence panel 16, where he's, this is a pivotal moment for Frederick Douglass when he's wrestling his captor, Covey, and Covey was more of like an officer, an overseer. They called him a slave breaker, right? Where people would send him to Covey, would get sent to Covey if you were disruptive, loud, you name it. You name any of the stereotypes they have for Black folks, you would get sent to Covey, and he would break folks. And so there was a moment when Douglas was sent, because Douglas was, he was just an intelligent, brilliant young man, and he just was not going to take anything.
Right.
And so he and Covey got into this scuffle, and Douglas beat him, and it really kind of changes the trajectory of Douglas's life because he beat him, and it told him a lot of what he can and cannot do. Wow. So you see on that checkered image of Covey, it looks like Covey has red hair. And then I found this here. That you could see the resemblance. And I don't know who did what. I mean, I don't know if this the comic person knew, because he must have, because the colors are so similar. I like to give people credit and say they knew, but it's just pretty funny.
Oh man.
So I do have a poem of this if you want to hear it.
Yeah, please.
All right, let's see. It's not panel 16. So let me find it. Sorry about that.
No problem. I'll just sit here and enjoy that cartoon.
Right? It's so funny how close they look alike. And one thing I'll say is that as we look for this, is that I think in what I think about when I think about Douglas in particular, I think about like just all the ways that he saw himself and all the ways he tried to describe himself, and think about this moment in particular, his retelling of it. It's very similar.
Sure.
And that, I mean, I think that's important, because as we think about even the way this whole insurgency at the Capitol is being repitched, and they tried to put it alongside of the things that happened in Portland and the BLM. But the folks of BLM never stormed a courthouse. It never happened that way. And I think about Covey even trying to repitch this or try to keep it quiet. But it's like, and Douglas was wise in his ways to not to be overt about it. But it told him something inside of him that said, hey, I know what I can do. Now, I might not need to say it out loud because at that point, it would damage so many different things for not just for him,
Mm.
but for all of those who were enslaved. And, you know, their captor on the Way farm that they had, the Way House, I think they called it WYE.
Mm.
They had so many enslaved folks. They owned so many enslaved folks there that it was crazy that he could have put them all in jeopardy. You know, there were hundreds and hundreds that he owned. I mean,
Mm.
it's just how wise Douglas was, and even in this moment, that you would think he would be jubilant about, but he takes it, instead of going outward with it, he brings it inward, and that motivates him to say, like, "Hey, I need to go.
Mm.
I need to go, and I see what I can do now." You know, people just are trying to say that blacks are inferior physically even to whites, and I just proved that wrong.
Mm.
You know, so this is called Mr. Covey, Shall We Dance? I am an ox, bare-chested, no shoes, toes dug into the dirt, pants hiked up to my knees. I can spell rhinoceros backwards,
Mm.
bend iron with my teeth, and work the leather that breaks a horse in two, that breaks the blue of night into black. I am that bold. I am the nails holding uneven boards upright. I will not splinter or buckle the soft wood, nor will I yield to treachery, your evil ways. Checkered devil, if you hold a hammer, then I'll hold your arms. One cinched at your hips, and the other high enough to twirl you around this barn and then to Japan. Yes, I know of that place too. If this were a jig, our glances might mingle, might be engulfed by sweat. We might be kissing. We might be juicy to the floor. Mud, logs, grass, and more juice. Combats intimacy. Close enough to see the red thread in your eyes or strike the odd rough, the white bark of your skin. As it is, the axe at your feet says, you aim to kill me. You wish to keep your reputation intact, but you are stunned by this feat of resistance. The shame blurs your vision. We wrestle like this for 2 hours, but for the rest of my life, no one beats me again. There it is.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, so many good lines. Yes, I know where that is too, talking about Japan. This, this idea that he's that he's been limited so much, but he will not be limited. He will not allow himself to be limited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. That is a great example of ekphrasis. Yeah. Right. This idea that you talked about the checkered shirt, you talked about the axe. I mean, you're dealing directly with that. And I just love the idea of art begets art.
Yeah.
Oh man.
For sure. And and sometimes my intention was to really say that, what if you couldn't see the picture? Could you see it enough in my words?
Sure.
Could it stand alone without seeing the picture? And could it speak to it enough? So there's hints of that. And then really what was Lawrence seeing as well to make them like that. And I think when you go back and you read the text, there's definitely like this eroticism about it, about this moment. And I think about that with any kind of fight, that how close you are with somebody. And, back then, skin to skin, it's a lot. And especially for two races of folks who have been separated. So to be touching one another is a big deal in and of itself, in any form or fashion, whether it be in anger or in passion, is intense.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's an undercurrent, or maybe not so subtle, of, like you said, like, sorry to say, but we are in this together. We're, like you said, the intimacy, the touching, the contact.
Yeah,
you can't keep us separated. You can't put yourself in one group and me in the other, that kind of thing.
right.
Man.
And Douglas said that slavery dehumanized both slave and captor. The obvious ways it dehumanized those who were enslaved, but it dehumanized those who saw themselves as the masters too, because of obvious reasons. I mean, we don't even need to go in it. It's just how horrific it is, and that still lingers today.
Of course.
Of course.
Definitely.
So that's why it was important to look at Douglas. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem. Definitely chill-inducing. I wonder what other writers, historical fiction, poetry, music, have given you chills at will throughout the years. Who are those writers who continue to inspire? I'm sure there are so many.
I think first and foremost, I got to say right now in the immediacy, because he was just named the San Francisco Poet Laureate.
All right, please speak on Tongo.
Tongo Ison Martin. I think Tongo, Tongo and I became fast friends, again, just like you and I, introduced through Mike Songson. And Tongo and I became fast friends because I mentioned where my dad was from. Tongo, when he graduated, he went to Jackson, Mississippi to do more political work, not poetry work, to do. And he walked from door to door, and he said it took so long because, you just don't, once you get somebody in the South, you get their ear, white, black, whoever, they're going to invite you in, you're going to have some lemonade or tea, and you're going to be hanging out. I would be at my dad's house for like 6 hours, and I'm like, all right, Pop, I got to go. And he's like, what? You just got here, and Tongo and I would laugh about that. And, Tongo is somebody who is definitely representative of the people and speaks for and with the people. And so, those kind of poets, definitely poets who do that, I love. Right now, I think it's important to read Ross Gay. I think Ross Gay speaks to the heart of why we're doing this thing, and to be able to write anything is a leisure and and privileged. And Ross Gay kind of flips that around to say, well, if that's the case, then here's what you can do. And and it's never like that overt, but I think and the first thing is really to be more human and to discover what that might mean. Like I mentioned, I'm a big fan of Natasha Trethewey, Tracy K. Smith, obviously. And I could go on and all of Cave Canem folks who are doing things. Mahogany Brown, my really good friend in Cave Canem. She and Geffrey Davis are probably the ones I'm closest to in and out of Cave Canem. But so many, Terrence Hayes is a big favorite of mine. And then even with Kundiman and all of, without Kundiman, I would have never finished this book because I was fortunate to learn from Kamiko Han, who was always a favorite, and she taught us this special way to write or to think about writing, and that's through the Zuhitsu. All of the folks who I've met who are through Cave Canem and through Kundiman have been inspirations and whether they have a book or not, it's just the way they love literature and the way they love poetry and writing and the way they love to see it in the context of their own cultures has meant so much.
Right. Well, your book 0 to 3 had some great reviews, some great some great reviews from Terrence Hayes and a couple others. You mentioned Tracy K. Smith as the one that won the prize through Cave Canem. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the book, the collection, including the cool idea behind the title 0 to 3 about development and such. And then also just for someone who doesn't know about Cave Canem, what a cool fraternity, sorority, community of writers. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what that is.
Sure. Cave Canem was started by Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady while they were on a trip in Italy, and they were at Pompeii, and both of them had particular interesting semesters. They were both coming off these kind of crazy semesters where they had spent with graduate students, African American graduate students, and they had just kind of been fed up with their own schooling and whatnot. And so both Cornelius and Toy had these moments separately, and people really leaned on them in duress about just like the cultural makeup of the writing workshop and how lacking it was. And so it was sitting with Cornelius and Toy, and they're on this trip, and they go to Pompeii to the house of the poet, and right on the floor is this black dog on a leash, and it says Cave Canem, which means beware of the dog. And it hit them immediately, was like, that's what we need. We need to become the home of Black poetry. And we want a black dog where the chain was broken. But to be a home is a place of safety, and to create this kind of safety, this safe space for Black folks to cultivate their own letters. And, for the last almost 25 years, Cave Canem has been doing that. And if you look at anybody who has won, any African American that is, who has won a major poetry award, they have been associated with Cave Canem. Many of them, about 99% of them, have been associated with Cave Canem, either by being an elder, a teacher there, or a participant, or an award winner of the Cave Canem Award, because they don't have to be a Cave Canem Fellow necessarily to be an award. But I mean, our most recent Pulitzer Prize winning poet, Jericho Brown, is a Cave Canem poet. So it's important to understand that history, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and so proud of my friends who've gone on to do amazing things.
What an incredible origins. I'm sorry to cut you off. I would say what an incredible origin story. And just the symbolism of, Pompeii, the lost city and the lost histories, and the, wanting to share it with the world. What an incredible story. Right.
And successful too, right?
Yeah.
Because there are other offshoots and different writing workshops that exist for African Americans, and I think they're just as important and just as crucial and vital. It's just the success that Cave Canem has been out of this world.
And it sounds like it's such a pay it forward type of thing too.
Yeah,
you're talking about Jericho Brown. I mean, I have no idea really how they select that, but I know there was a lot of talk on social media and such about having him do the inauguration poem. No, but fortunately, we have a young writer from LA who's going to be doing the poetry.
Yeah, Amanda Gorman.
Yeah.
So I got to read with Amanda. I'm so happy about that, because actually I was one of the judges for her first thing. Yeah, first poetry. So a good friend, Michael Sorelli.
Okay, yeah.
Who interviewed me for 0 to 3 and really helped me with my first book, and he is in charge of promoting youth poet laureates throughout the country. He runs Urban Word out of New York, and have been doing this in New York and Amanda was the first one here in LA, and they published her book. And then, like, kind of like she's just like this amazing little uh, stick of dynamite,
She
man,
really,
of joy
yeah.
and intelligence, and just lights up the room when she walks in. And Michael got to do this with the Obamas and
Mm,
bring a group of students there, and Amanda again blew them away.
yeah.
And so it's rightly so that in right the moment of hope that we need, that we turn to a youth. And
Yes.
and Amanda
Yes.
has just finished her, being at Harvard, and
Mm-hmm.
she's fantastic. And she's someone who overcame a lot.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so to have her at the inauguration is going to be
That's gonna be incredible. That's gonna be so cool. She's what, 22, 23?
about, yeah,
Yeah. Oh man.
if
If
that,
that.
because I think she was young going to college.
Oh, okay. That would make sense. Yeah.
So yeah.
So 0 to 3. I wonder how that title came about for your collection.
Um, well, kind of like you mentioned, and thinking about this idea of development, and thinking about at the time I first started writing, most folks who were in the childcare business thought the most fundamental time for a child was a conception to their 3 years old. And now I think they say 0 to 5, right?
Mm,
Are
right.
those fundamental the times for them and for children's lives. And so that's where the idea of it came. But I
Mhm.
also think, and this as a parent, you grow a lot too, and you change a lot too. And all of those things that a parent goes through might not necessarily be as researched or discussed as
Mhm.
much as they should be.
Mhm.
They're discussed in terms of, when it's a negative, like postpartum depression or something like that. But the changes that you just go into uh, are important to kind of take note of. And I think that's what 0 to 3 is trying to do.
Mhm.
So I wrote it the year after my dad had died. And so
Mhm.
thinking about him, how I was parented too, and how I parent, those things became important to
Mhm.
look at. And my last year at Cave Canem, I met Geffrey Davis, and he and I would talk a lot about fatherhood and a lot about our ideas about revamping fatherhood, and this idea of kind of this heteronormative idea of fatherhood, and very patriarchal way of fatherhood, and is problematic, and it
Mhm.
has been. And to say that your father has the say to do X, Y, and Z, it didn't sit well with us. And also, we found ourselves as African American fathers, um, a little bit under the thumb of the stereotype father, and we weren't coming from great examples of that. I really love my father. My father really loved me, but a lot of absenteeism, and just different things that he was dealing with that he never really like imparted to me or whatnot. And so those things were hard. And same with Jeffrey and his father. His father, he spent a lot of time, and I'll say this because it's in this poetry. He spent a good portion of his time in jail and away from the family. And
Mhm.
so here we both were, these younger fathers and artists. How are we going to deal with this? And I think both of us went on after Cave Canem to write these books. Both of us won book awards for them. I think always with a book award, it matters not just in how good the book is, but who's reading it, if it really resonates with them. I
Mhm.
think it really resonated with Tracy K. Smith's sensibilities, and what she was paying attention to. So
Right.
um, yeah, that's kind of the theme. And then the icon, I kind of go away from that, and then and most recently the things that I'm writing about now are starting to examine that again.
Oh.
So, you know, the idea of fatherhood is never done, and in one book, I
Yeah.
think, you know. But it's been fun. It's been fun to
Yeah.
examine. I think it's made me a better parent
Mm-hmm.
to think about these things. It's not like therapeutic, so to speak, but I always say that the writing is gonna gives you the will to go, maybe go seek out therapy or to go fix the thing that you
Mm.
need to fix, whatever that might be. So and that's what it is. So if I'm going to say something in a poem, I know my real life, either I better be working towards that or
Mm.
asking myself those questions too,
Sure.
and not just using it as fodder for my art, if that makes sense.
It does. That's really interesting. You know, you do hear a lot of people say maybe kind of glibly that, you know, writing is therapeutic, and you're saying, well, it's getting you there. It's on the way
Yeah,
too. That's very interesting.
yeah.
Now, pardon me if I don't. So, the Epistemology of Laundry, is that from 0 to 3, or is that from a different collection?
No, that's from, so
Okay,
Geffrey Davis and I, we wrote a little chapbook together
the chapbook one.
called
Okay.
Begotten,
Uh-huh.
and that's where that appears. The epistemology of,
Love to
because
hear that if you wouldn't mind. You know, with
sure,
especially with talking about fathers.
the epistemology of laundry. This week's last load of laundry has me stealing my son's precious teenage time. I enact the duty of my father, and what comes hammering back are trips with him pushing his cart of dirties down the street, his southern charm waving or shaking hands. Bus driver, mailman, neighbors get countless invites to dinner or a Saturday barbecue. My father's "Good morning, darling" clanks and pings as quarters spill into a bona fide grip of the present day of the present. My son's hands show signs he's ready for the tedious work ahead as he storms through pile after pile. Then this percussion when offering assistance to a stranger. This chore becomes a lesson for the two of us. This shared work turns and tumbles, neatly folds.
I appreciate that. I really liked seeing it on the page as well. Um, I think that like that last line, there's a
Yeah,
separation that you have. You know, not just a separation of line to line, but a physical separation, a white space, a gulf there. But I love, you know, you talk about like almost like a new paradigm in parenting and fathering, if you will, but also like passing on those great lessons you learned from your father.
right. And a lot of so what Jeffrey and I were wanted to do with our books in particular, and with this book Begotten, is to um, be in conversation with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeffrey has a lot of these epistemology type of poems where you're really wondering, you know, how did I know that? When did I know what and
Mm.
when? You know what I mean? When did I know I was good at this, or when did I know that this was going to be important? And I think that idea kind of fleshes out not just in a lot of his work, but just like in his everyday being.
Mm-hmm.
That how can when I'm passing something down, I need to be able to pass it down with a reason behind it
Mm-hmm.
versus just like do as you're told because I'm telling you to.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's like this poem in particular, and I haven't read this in a long time. So thanks for asking me to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you as a child, the child you, remember about your parent that you do, even though they never told you explicitly to do this, do
Sure.
that?
Sure.
Like you were always watching. So like,
Yeah.
you know, you asked me earlier, when did I become a DJ? I think about the same thing about when I became a poet.
Hmm.
And I think my parents were always trying to get me to be a poet because they wanted me to pay attention to these things, these actions, this everyday use, so I can bring it to my kids one day. That was their hope. They didn't want me to be a poet per se, but just speaking metaphorically, they wanted me to be somebody who was paying attention to those things for the legacy of their own lives,
Yeah. Everyday use. I think maybe I'm not fully privy to the conversation, but it seems like maybe Alice Walker is a bit problematic these days. But what a short story! One that I've
right?
taught many times, and so good. I definitely think of my parents when I hear the epistemology of laundry. I also think of my grandparents. My grandpa is Joe Albanese. He's a Santa Clara guy. I don't know if you heard of the Albanese construction when you were at Santa Clara, but I think doing laundry is a pretty banal type of thing, right? I think of him every time that I get up from a chair and I'll like hum, especially when he got older and the bones were brittle. He would get up and so happy though all the time, and he'd be humming to himself, and I do that, right? And when you talk about the father, whether it's literally your father in that poem or not, but shaking hands with everybody, that's my grandma. How are you doing, darling? How are you? Making friends with the waiter at the restaurant, knowing how many kids she's got by the end of the time, at the dinner table.
Right. That's the Southern ways of them,
Nice.
So many people. I'm like, he's my dad would tell you he loved you like right away, like way too fast.
You're like, are you sure? That's funny. That's so funny.
I'm very similar in that way. Like, oh, that, and he meant it. You knew, because he'd invite you over and he would remember all the things that he said that you that you introduced him with, and you feel immediately part of the family.
Well, Sandra Bland's name unfortunately has become one of many who, died too early because of police violence and racism. But you have the Sandra Bland series.
Right.
What exactly is that?
So right after Sandra Bland was killed, we didn't know what to do. And when I say we, I mean as like a poet community in LA. A lot of folks always rally around the men who die, and
rightfully
of course,
so,
rightfully so. But it's something to be said about the women who have died, and a lot of silence. Breonna Taylor was probably the most celebrated and on everyone's lips because of how egregious it is. And again, because of COVID, we're all sitting here watching and looking,
right?
And thankfully so, as much as we would want her back, thankfully so, it got so much attention. And without Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I don't think the directions would be all over the place. And I think Sandra Bland, you could probably put her in there for sure, in that same boat. And I think if more people had known about what had happened, they wouldn't have ruled out the things that I think constitute a murder. When we look at Sandra Bland and we look at who she was, and when I looked at her, I just felt, here's somebody who's really trying to make the world better and is really trying to use a platform that is accessible to everyone. She was big on Facebook and Twitter, and had these like little quotes or little sayings. She was just really like seemed like a really good person trying to figure it out. And then all the stuff happened. And so it became important for me to try to honor that. And another, this woman in LA who's executive director of this organization called, oh my God, why am I going blank? We got to edit this. Oh my God, why? I'll have to look it up. But anyway, it became important for her to offer the space for us to do programming for Sandra Bland, and she and I kind of came up with this idea. And then for, the first 3 years, I curated the whole thing. And then the more it became to me, it became really important for me to put it in the hands of women of color. And that was initially how we thought of it to be. And so it became, the last year we did it was just all women writers. There were 2 women who hosted it and curated it, and they're all women writers and readers for the events.
Oh,
nice. And in terms of like restorative justice, restoring just how people felt so alone with this, and just to hear so much emotional poetry around it, and to allow us to have a space where we could come together safely and say these things, and to it really just kind of changed the way I see and think of a reading and think of my own work. So it's been so powerful. It's been tough. We didn't do one over the COVID time. This would have been the time we would have put it together. And our first ones are usually during Black History Month. But yeah, it's been a phenomenal reading series. And it's never about the poets. Like, that's the whole thing. We don't allow bios of any kind. We really take our cues from Black Poets Speak Out, another kind of poetry organization founded by Amanda Johnston and Mahogany Brown, Jericho Brown, and Gentiri Gadsden. And they really kind of made the foundation of what it is that poets would do. And so the idea of Sandra, the Requiem reading, is that, folks would read poems that weren't theirs. There would be no bios read. We had this mantra that they would read over and over again. And like, when you hear that mantra with the poems, a little healing happens.
Yeah.
And, we always had good numbers, and you could just tell, like, people would walk in with this one feeling, and then by the break, there would be just such like an abundance of relief, an overwhelming. You could just hear and feel this relief, overwhelming amount of relief from folks about what transpired and so on. So
that's
it's
such
a phenomenal reading.
Yeah, that's such a cool idea of the poets seem to be like the instruments. Like you said, they're not saying, hey, my latest book, buy it at Barnes and Noble.
Right.
It's about the issues, the idea. Wow.
Yeah, and I had my students help out. So I have a small little poetry group, and they would help out, and a group of students would write songs and learn about Sandra Bland, learn about police violence, learn about BLM, like all of the things. And it's not a thing to just like point fingers at it. And that's what a lot of folks don't understand about when you say it's a Black Lives Matter reading or event, that it's really about healing and about things that have gone on for far too long. And this is, how can we get people to hear that these emotional poems that aren't written, a lot of those poems, the poems that I would always read weren't written by me, weren't written in contemporary times. These are poems that have been written 40, 50 years ago.
Right. Right.
If not more.
It's a great transition into to you as a teacher, you as an educator. You on your website, you call yourself an educator, which, I guess is different than a teacher. How do you see your role as an educator, which is more of a general question, then specifically, what do you teach? Who are some of the writers you teach? What do you enjoy about teaching? And go Cubs, by the way. You teach at Loyola High School in LA.
That's right. Yeah, this is my 13th year at Loyola. Okay. This is my 26th year. I got to update my website. This is my 26th year as a teacher.
So you were teaching right out of college, probably then, huh?
right out of college.
Yeah,
I
same
had a
with me.
job right away,
Same with me.
right
Yeah.
away.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught at my alma mater in San Francisco,
Okay.
and then went to teaching. I taught a little bit of university, taught a little bit of community college,
Mm.
um, and all of that. What I think I've always tried to do as an educator is learn with students. I think that's important, to do things that are relevant with them. So to pay attention to their lives and how my scholarship connects with that,
Mm-hmm.
and connects with them artistically even. I think my art is important to bring into the classroom.
Yeah.
So I think that my big thing is why I say educator over just teacher, at least in the masthead of my website there,
Mm.
is to really think about uh, how I'm one with them, doing these things together with them. And I'm not going to always be just the leader.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my idea of teaching leadership is to teach them how to be the ones in front,
Sure.
and to give them those opportunities.
Sure.
What I love about There's so many things that I love about teaching. There's so many things that I love over the years, and students who I love. Um, but I think it always feels good when a student you've had decides to become a teacher.
Yeah.
There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like that, and I just, or even in my case, who decides to be a writer, even more so. You
Yep.
know, I apologize to their parents always when that happens. Unless they're a fiction writer, but
The
if they
starving
decide to go
artist, yeah.
poetry.
Have you ever been a
um,
colleague? Have you ever been a colleague of one of your students, one of your former students?
I want to say indirectly, I
Mm.
have. So there's one of my former students at Brophy.
Mhm.
Because we are in the same order of
Sure.
schools, and we
Sure.
do work together.
Mhm.
We've done work together, but we're not at the same schools. Two
Okay.
students. One is the dean, and one is actually leaving to take a university job.
Mm.
But he's phenomenal. Both of them
Nice.
are just really like impressive what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. So
Nice. Nice. What are some of the best books or poem? What are some of your maybe your go-tos or not? Maybe they're newer, but what are some of the been your favorites to teach?
Miscegenation by Natasha Trethewey,
Okay.
Feet by Ross Gay, and King County Metro by Geffrey Davis. Those three poems are always the first three poems out the gate.
Yeah.
Like you're getting that first, second day of school or
Mm-hmm.
class, or no, second or third day of
Mm-hmm.
class. Primarily because they're very subtle. Like when you look at them, they don't scare you off as a poem. Like
Sure.
I can give you a poem that just like make you like, no, I don't want to do this. But they don't do that. Those poems really invite you in,
Mm-hmm.
and really there's so much to dissect in all of them,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much to aspire to without being the Empire State Building.
Sure.
Um, what else? There's so many poems. I used to love teaching this poem called An Anointing by Thaleus Moss. I don't teach this poem anymore, or actually, no, I do. In the summer, I teach 6th, 7th, 8th graders, and I love teaching the Blue Seuss by Terrence Hayes.
Okay.
That's a poem you could teach at any level. You could teach 6th, 7th, 8th graders. You could teach high school students.
Mm-hmm.
You could teach college and grad students that poem, and I love it for that nature. But I think I don't shy away from wanting to talk about the hard things. And you need something that will give you a gateway into that. And that poem
Right.
does that.
Mm-hmm.
That poem offers that very familiar language of Dr. Seuss, but wow. I mean, it's basically the history of African Americans in this country in that poem. And so I think I'm always looking for poems that are gateways like that. A poem recently that I use, and I kind of do this like extended conversation with yourself. And that's a poem called To the Notebook Kid by Eve Ewing.
Okay.
It's been a very helpful one to get students, again, very familiar language and what it's trying to do for students, but super complex.
Yeah.
If we really look at it from, analytical point. The students love that poem. I use Wanda Coleman, Wanda, Why Aren't You Dead? Ocean Vuong's Someday I'll Love You, Ocean Vuong. I love that poem. All three of those would make up like one grouping of poems that I give students for a writing prompt, for example. So,
well, I mean, there's nothing as cool as hearing from, the poet himself or herself. So in some cases you are the poet. You talk about teaching Geffrey Davis and Natasha Trethewey. Do you ever have them come in physically or on Zoom or virtually to talk about their own work with your students?
Geffrey has been to my school. Because many of them teach as well. I know how the Zoom thing is. While they're doing it, I haven't, not with Geffrey. I do have some this week, actually, right after we take this call. I got to talk to one poet, Jenny Molberg is going to come to my class this week. And Tongo's going to come.
All right.
And then the poet, Vicky Vertiz, is going to come to my class. Yeah, Zoom has allowed so much. And I don't take advantage of my network the way I should, and mostly because a lot of them are teachers, and I understand their time. Sometimes it's good to get off of this platform.
That's true. Well, give me that Zoom link. I'm trying to come to some of your classes and hear from some of these poets. All right, I'll just be a student in the background. Is that cool? I'll keep it muted.
There you go.
I won't.
For sure.
What have you got? What are you working on these days?
So I'm about 80 pages into this new manuscript called the Liner Notes. It's like about 3 or 4 poems I really that I need to wrestle with to go in there before it's ready. And one of those is this long kind of sonic crown. So it's gonna be a long one. Yeah, I've been working on that. I've been working on some essays. I'm looking forward to this spring. I have 2 essays coming out, one in the Langston Hughes Review and another as part of this anthology called Teaching Black, where several African American poets and writers were asked. We answered a call to publish some of the things that we do with our students. And I did a conversation piece with with my colleague who runs, he's the director of equity and inclusion at my school. He's not a writer, but I've been set to make him a writer. He's a fantastic storyteller. And so he and I wrote he also teaches. He also is a basketball coach.
Wow.
He's our head varsity basketball coach, and he's a Columbia alum. So just amazing guy all the way around, Jamal Adams.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And Jamal is just a fantastic storyteller, and he and I always have conversations about Ta-Nehisi Coates, and we both use Ta-Nehisi in our class. He teaches African American history, and I teach African American poetry. So Ta-Nehisi started off his writing career as a poet, and so I like to use Between the World and Me to kind of see, like, okay, what goes into making a poet? Like, this is how a poet gets made. Let's look at Ta-Nehisi's interests and the way he's doing and whatnot. And Jamal uses Ta-Nehisi. He doesn't use Between the World and Me, but definitely uses different articles from Ta-Nehisi Coates in his classroom. So we talk about that, and we did it in true Ta-Nehisi Coates fashion to write it as letters back and forth to one another.
Okay.
And I think that kind of collegiality is important, but also as Black men on a campus that's predominantly white is important too, like our own care for one another in these letters, in our own scholarship rings true. And then the editor, so much that the editors, when they told us to pare it down, they didn't tell us to lose those. They said to lose these things maybe in this chapter, but don't lose them altogether. That we had the makings of a book. And so when we pulled things out to edit it, we started to use those as other chapters for a book.
Oh, nice. Wow.
And so that's this week, you know, every now and then I'll hit Jamal up with a prompt. I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about this, tell me about that. And, you know, it becomes a longer piece. And then, you know, yeah, we have some legs for a book.
Sounds
so we'll
like
see.
it. Wow, that sounds really cool and interesting. You talk about the Langston Hughes Review. Is that out of a certain university or?
Well, the publisher is out of Kansas.
Okay,
University
right.
of Kansas,
Okay.
KU. But I don't know if the review is. It might be its own separate thing.
Okay.
Because it's Langston Hughes, you know, and but that's like a really traditional journal. You know, it's a peer-reviewed journal type of journal, and that's the first time I've ever written for that type of journal. And to work with somebody the way I worked with the editor was made. It's like when you have a musician and a producer work together. You know, the producer will be like, "Well, I know who you are, but you know, you're not hitting these notes the way I know you can hit them. Can you do it X, Y, and Z way?" And then boom, here comes the singer hitting it the way that the producer heard it and whatnot. And so that's kind of like what it was. Like he appreciated a lot of it. And he's like, this is a good essay, but it could be great if we do these things. And I just listened to him and try to elevate, and he loved it. He loved it.
Well, we can't leave without talking about music a little bit. You're a DJ. I would say on the side, but I don't want to limit you. Who were some of your music influences growing up? And you know, what are you DJing? What are you playing? What do you got on the turntables?
Well, number one is Prince for me. You know, number one is Prince, and I think mostly because I grew up with a lot of funk music because of my brothers and sisters, and a lot of disco, and a lot of old school R&B because of my mother and father. And so that's always in the mix. And being a DJ allows me to listen to all of those things.
Right.
You know, I'm a big, obviously old school hip hop, 90s hip hop kind of guy, and house music too. Like I love deep house music because of its foundations during that time in hip hop. So like, you know, as problematic as African Bombada is, you know, Planet Rock is still like one of my favorite hip hop songs of all time because of its electronic sound and you know, I love that. I love that. Like all those Detroit and Chicago deep house guys, and so on. Juan McClain, Carl Cox, all those guys. In terms of my own DJing, I really love like eclectic music. So the things I'm writing about right now are really heavily rooted in grief and talking about the death of my mother that happened 3 years ago. I really had to find a way, and the way that I have found to talk about it best is through music and mostly through the mixtape. And so a group of other poets, of other DJs, and we have a little DJ crew called the Hollow Hollow DJs, the Hollow Hollow DJ crew. And, you know, 3 or 4 of us in that group, we have all lost our mothers. And so we had like this long kind of conversation about it. And, you know, when you make a mixtape, and I'm Peter, I'm sure, and you go back, what's your wife's name, Peter?
Monica.
Monica. I bet you I could ask her. Oh, that's my sister's name is Monica.
Hey.
I bet you I could ask your wife, like those early times when you were just meeting and you were courting one, you probably dropped some kind of a mix on her, right?
True,
Tape,
true, true,
CD,
true.
playlist, Spotify list, however it translates to
Mm-hmm.
whomever your partner might be. It's one of those things we do, right?
Right.
And we put so much effort in it. We put so much love and intention and
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that we want it go in it. But then I asked the question, and we talked about that. And then I asked the question, I'm like, well, have you ever done that for your mother? And one of the DJs had, and that question, that idea of putting so much of yourself in a thing for your parent,
Hmm.
I wish I did. I have friends who were better than me. And so there's a poem that kind of examines that.
Oh, wow. Very interesting.
Now I look at Joy Division, a lot of Kid A, Radiohead, Kid A.
Mm.
Kid A has become, I don't know, my soundtrack of grief and recovery. Prince, obviously, like I said, and just like a lot of different musics get mixed. And it's almost like I'm writing this poem as a mix,
Mm-hmm.
as I'm putting it together. So it's a crown of sonnets. It's almost finished.
Right.
Um, and with the crown of sonnets, you have that one line that links to the
Mm.
next section, and that has really helped out because that's the way a mix should happen, like where you
Sure.
really mix the things. So um, that's been fun to write. It's
I
hard, but
bet.
it's been fun to write too.
Yeah. Kid A, everything in its right place.
That's it right
Right.
there.
Idiotech.
Yeah.
That's a great album.
Optimistic.
That's a great album. Yeah.
That's a great
My,
album.
my
So
friends and I
yeah,
always joke though. Radiohead did Idiotech live on Saturday Night Live, and it was like literally one of the guys, maybe Johnny Greenwood. I don't know more than Tom and him, but was literally had his back to the audience and was like unplugging and plugging. You talk about
the
electronic
whole
music.
time.
Yeah, it was like it's different than the shows you're used to, but
Oh, I
wow.
gotta find that. I gotta
Yeah.
find that.
So what are you how every generation says, oh man, my hip hop, my music, whatever was better. Are you buying into J. Cole and Big Sean and Kendrick? How do you look at today's hip hop?
Oh yeah. Well, I think if you love the music, those three are transcendent, right?
Okay.
That's just like saying, well, can you like Kobe? I think Kendrick is,
Doesn't matter what
and
generation, yeah.
no matter what, he
Right,
could ball. He
right,
could
right,
ball.
right, right.
Same with J. Cole.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I throw, you know, the thing about this younger generation, and this is the thing, my friend Jamal and I had to really, we have to reconcile with. This is an ongoing conversation. Uh, is what I don't think is I think this new generation, why we think our generation of hip hop is superior, is I don't think we understand the cadence of this new generation.
Okay.
And the cadence of this new generation has so many more influences even than ours. And
Mm.
even if, our generation started hip hop, and if you go back to those origins, there's a lot more rock, there's a lot more funk in it,
Hmm.
and if you just looked at funk back then, it's going to obviously be rock in it. And these kids have all of that and then some, and then some. So
Sure.
their cadences, when you listen to Kendrick, is so complex, and same with J. Cole.
Mm.
Um, and those two might be at the top, but then all of the littles and all of the Aesop's. Can you hear them? And
Aesop's
give them honor.
fables and Aesop's ferg and Aesop's fables and yeah,
I have
that's funny.
a
That's funny.
I have a thing. I don't know if you have time for me to read it, but I have an Aesop name in one of
Yeah,
these poems.
yeah. I'm
Um,
I'm gonna give you a quick recommendation that I'll have you read that. Have you listened to the Dissect podcast? Have you heard of it?
no,
It's they do a
should I?
different they do a different album every season. So they did Kanye's I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the album, the Fantastic Fabulous something, I'm forgetting it. They did Kendrick, they did Frank Ocean, They did
One album per season?
one album per season. It's really, as a writer and as a DJ, you'd love it. I mean,
Yeah,
the
no doubt.
New York Times gave it, I think Wesley Morris named it the best podcast in 2008. I mean, I'm not the only one saying this. So check it out. They did one on Childish Gambino last season.
Okay.
It's really
Yeah, I
good.
would love to look at that. And I think in terms of cadence, and
Hmm.
I think these young ones are really heavily influenced by Kanye. Kanye is
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the godfather of it.
yeah,
If you really look
yeah.
at like all of his knowledge and breadth of music.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm really interested. The dissect, huh?
Dissect podcast. Yeah, I don't know. We could talk for hours. I don't know what to say about Kanye the person. I don't know. I'm not going to try to wade in there, but he's unbelievable.
Yeah,
He was at one time. I mean, his music
yeah.
is unbelievable. So, anyways, but yeah, what do you got for us?
All right, so I'm gonna read you these little sonnets first,
Awesome.
um, and they integrate. I'm gonna read you four quick sonnets, um, and you're gonna see just like things I'm paying attention to with my
Hmm.
mother passing away, to Kid A, to The Last Dragon, to
Oh,
Sound of Music.
yeah.
All right,
Wow.
all right, here we go. Oh, and it's called A DJ Spins the Blues. So
Great title.
gives me permission to do all of those things.
Sure. I like them.
DJ Mo Wozone, aka Soldier Sister, aka Where's She At, spends the blood's worth of sworn proof when her longest relationship ends. In the dim January light, kisses mom's forehead, strokes away any loose strands of black or gray hair so mom's exit eloquent. Cue quiet brown haze, loop dim light. And here come the requests. Hold her hand. Yes, she's looking between small and slight coughs, which you finally ingest. Take all last breaths, hers into yours, hers into yours, hers into that damn dim room. DJ Soldier Sister, DJ fade in volume, DJ tap and test the mic as you bend down. Mom, it's okay. You can go. Mom, it's okay. You can go. We'll be fine. DJ Noons, aka DJ Michon Mish, aka DJ Portugalaxy, announces, Mom, we'll be fine. He's a friend. Then Noons drops Kid A as I excuse myself to a toilet. DJ Bubbleguts, DJ Run Away from Cut and Run Away from Awkward Meetings. Kid A defends friendship in front of her mother's apprehension. Kid A, Kid A's seamless divinity defines relationship to God. One foot stomps earth, the other in mystic, in sound realm. Kid A in New York City in the 90s and on repeat. Noons remixes nostalgia, small talk to counter my embarrassment. Everything in its right place as I become her mother's brief friend, joining all the surrogate mothers I've compiled over the years into a mixtape entitled Eyes Everywhere. Tracks of familiar riffs until Kid A drops and vibes the moment. Noons says, the blank beginning where you, the maker, asked to give, and I reply like a mom's boundless chords. DJ Malin Hamplo, aka DJ Chata Chata Slow Dance, asks a boundless question. What room does Kid A occupy in your soul's house? And this one glows like the last dragon, or just the crush on vanity. When Malin Hamplo inquires, this one sings his mother Olga. This one casts his gaze out to the ocean, spins and scratches Olga's antics. Oh, silhouette wrapped around a parent, golden orange, and we back in the brilliance of films, vivid on the actor children from Sound of Music. Their father, his military hiding depression in gray and green, hiding all his children tried to say, but when the captain walks unto his soul's house, cue recognizing a missing parent, even if only an imitation of. Cue Kid A. Cue all the golden Malin Hamplo sings. My mom, she fed the people. Cue Olga and her good time glow. Cue her dear son illuminating her legend. DJ Von Trapp Music, aka ASAP Edelweiss, aka Cappy Cap. Cue the legend of a deceased wife and deceased mother, now in the good time glow of a choir. The captain's dear children and their performative unison in uniform. His heart, one side wood and doorway, the other dark whistles and demands. When it finally yields, surprise reaches out as if to say, the hills are lonely, but I am yours. Believe the two colors of any song's head, gray and gold, or green and guitar. When the captain takes the lead, when the children and their heartbeats accompany, believe the remix too. I'm yours, dear hearts. I'm yours. The best of you remains your mother's legend. I'll stop there.
Wow. Beautiful. The best of you remains your mother's legend. Wow. The repetition.
But like any mix, it's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. No, I thank you for sharing. It's beautiful. Do you feel some sort of catharsis after writing that?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, a lot of it is dealing with the sharing of grief. So there's a lot of catharsis that goes outward and inward in that way, you know, because so many people have given back to me. So like these little links to these DJs, their names, some of them are made up, some of them are their actual DJ names or call names or whatever, like on Instagram or whatever that I've turned into that. But you learn about, you know, their own ways that they deal with grief. And so I'm kind of playing with that in a way that's definitely therapeutic.
So I'll teach that in my English class, but I'll teach that in my English class. So give me like 2 weeks. That's not something you do in one day. There's, like you said, there's so much going on there. All the allusions, all the different types of music, the repetition, the alliteration.
Right. I mean, and again, like, how can it stand on its own? So like, you know, there's a moment where the voice seems like it leaps. And does that gonna confuse a reader when they see this, or do you see that as like part of the mix of it, you know? And it goes, it alludes to one movie, so it could talk about another one in depth.
Sure.
And you know, just things that I ask myself, it's like, well, did you really get the full thing of Sound of Music? Like, why is that important to you? And you know, the whole importance of that movie for me, like what always gets me is that moment that I talk about, is when the captain changes and his kid's like, oh, there you are again. Like, you've come back to us. And, you know, he's saying the same thing. It feels like he's saying the same thing to them. Like, there you are too. Like, they're seeing each other for the first time. And as a father, that chokes me up.
Sure.
You know, that, and part of the poem and where the poem is going towards is that, you know, my brother said this when my mother passed away, or he said this at her funeral, that I learned everything from my mother, you know, and I agree with that. And that if you can, how often, again, the mixtape, we do and put so much effort in it. And like the moms and fathers who raised us, how do we honor that effort?
Yeah.
And keep that, their legend And when they're gone, there's like some genuine pain that
Oh
I
yeah.
think that in Sound of Music, the captain was really never confronting, and he just was kind of putting it away.
Mm. What a great one to end on. I mean, we heard probably 4 or 5, and I love how, you know, some years have multiple parts. There's so much good to listen to, and you know, we talked about so many good writers that I'm going to pick up. I'm going to check out some more of their stuff, and I hope the listeners will as well. And just wish you continued great luck with your teaching, with your DJing, with your writing, and thank you for sharing such personal poems and
No,
such
thank you.
incredibly dynamic poetry for sure.
And if this becomes, we hope, into a book, I would love to come back and
Oh,
talk to you specifically about this
yeah,
project in particular. You know.
yeah. That's a promise. I would love to have you back. Thank you again so much. I want to
All
thank
right.
everyone at home for listening to episode 38 with F. Douglas Brown. You can now subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a 5-star review. You can also ask for the podcast by name using Alexa, and find the pod on Spotify and on Amazon Music. Please follow me on Instagram, where I'm at Chills at Will Podcast, or on Twitter, where I'm at Chills at Will PO1. This is a passion project of mine, a DIY operation, and I'd love for your help in promoting what I'm convinced is a unique and spirited look at an often ignored art form. The intro song for the Chills at Will podcast is Wind Down instrumental version, and the other song played on this episode was Hoops instrumental by Matt Whitehour. And both songs are used through archesaudio.com. For now, thanks again for listening, and I hope that these quarantine days bring you texts by writers with mad skills like F. Douglas Brown, whose work gives you chills at will.